Picture this. It is the peak of summer. The sun has been up since before you woke, and it will still be burning when you want to go to sleep. The air is thick, the ground is hard, and somewhere in the distance, a body of water is doing that shimmering thing that makes it look far more inviting than it probably is. Your to-do list for today is extensive and entirely physical. There is no air conditioning. There is no refrigerator stocked with cold beverages. There is no weekend in the conceptual sense. No Friday feeling, no Saturday morning where obligations dissolve, and you can simply exist horizontally watching something on a screen. There is just the sun, the land, the heat, and approximately 10,000 things that need doing before the season turns. Welcome to Summer, Paleolithic Edition. Most people, when they imagine ancient humans, freeze them in some vague, undifferentiated moment of struggle. Cold cave, desperate hunt, barely surviving. The seasonal dimension almost never enters the popular imagination. But summer in the deep human past wasn't just the absence of winter's problems. It was its own category of experience entirely. A cascade of opportunity, urgency, abundance, danger, social expansion, and exhausting, relentless physical labor that would flatten most modern people inside a week. What ancient humans did during summer is one of the more revealing windows into what daily prehistoric life actually looked like. And the answer, predictably, is far more layered, more human, and frankly more interesting than the popular imagination tends to allow. Begin with the fundamental reality that summer changed everything about the operational context of ancient human life. And it did so across every dimension simultaneously. Daylight was the most immediate transformation. At higher latitudes, where significant portions of the Homo sapiens range extended into Europe, Central Asia, and eventually the Arctic fringes, the difference in usable daylight between winter and summer solstice is dramatic. 15, 16, 17 hours of light in midsummer versus 8 or 9 in midwinter. This wasn't merely a pleasant bonus, it was a profound expansion of the working day, and ancient humans used every hour of it. The evidence from ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer populations at various latitudes confirms what common sense suggests. Activity patterns expand dramatically with available light, and summer represents a period of intensified effort across almost every subsistence activity. Temperature effects on prey behavior were the second major seasonal shift. Many large mammals in temperate and boreal environments concentrate their movements seasonally, migrating to higher elevations or different geographic zones as vegetation patterns change with summer heat, congregating near water sources as open terrain dries, moving in predictable patterns that experienced hunters could read and anticipate. For ancient humans whose survival depended on intercepting these movements, understanding summer animal behavior wasn't a hobby. It was the curriculum. Plant resources underwent the most visible transformation. From the near-total vegetative dormancy of winter, the landscape exploded through spring into the peak productivity of summer. A compressed window of extraordinary botanical abundance that ancient humans exploited with organized intensity. Berries, fruits, tubers, greens, seeds, nuts developing toward autumn harvest. The summer foraging calendar was densely packed and time-sensitive in ways that demanded systematic attention. A berry patch at peak ripeness waits for no one, and over-ripens indifferently. The daily rhythm of summer for a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer band was shaped by heat in ways that modern people in climate-controlled environments rarely consider. The most punishing period of summer days in temperate and subtropical environments falls roughly between late morning and mid-afternoon, when solar radiation is most direct and ambient temperature peaks. Ancient humans, lacking any mechanism to artificially cool their environments, structured activity around this reality with the same pragmatic intelligence they applied to everything else. High-intensity physical activity, hunting, long-distance travel, heavy foraging work, was front-loaded into the morning hours when temperatures were manageable and prey animals were most active. The midday hours particularly, in warmer climates, saw a reduction in strenuous activity in favor of rest, shade-seeking, food processing, tool maintenance, and social interaction. This isn't speculation. The pattern is visible in the behavior of virtually every human population studied in warm climate environments without industrial cooling and in the behavior of most large mammals in the same environments. Heat is a physiological constraint that applies equally to ancient humans and modern ones. The difference is that ancient humans had no choice but to organize their lives around it, while modern humans have largely engineered the constraint away, and in doing so, arguably disrupted circadian and activity patterns that were calibrated over hundreds of thousands of years. The morning hunting expeditions in summer were different from their winter equivalents in important ways. Vegetation was dense, providing cover for prey, but also for ambush and complicating tracking through reduction of visible sign. Insects were abundant, including biting insects that affect both human movement and prey animal behavior. Prey animals were in better physical condition than in the lean months. More meat per animal, but also more alert, faster, and less desperate in their movement. The summer hunt required different tactical approaches than winter hunting, including reading animal behavior specific to heat stress, knowing which water sources attracted specific prey at specific times of day, and understanding the effect of dense vegetation on weapon effectiveness at range. Water was the central organizing resource of the summer landscape in many environments. In temperate grasslands, savannas, and Mediterranean-type environments, summer brought reduced rainfall and the concentration of animal activity around permanent water sources. Rivers, lakes, springs, and seasonal pools that retained water longest. Ancient human camps frequently shifted in summer towards these water concentrations, not only for direct human water needs, but because concentrated prey around water sources created hunting efficiency. The animal comes to you, eventually, if you wait in the right place. Fishing emerges as one of the most archaeologically visible and behaviorally significant summer activities across an enormous range of ancient human populations. Summer is peak fishing season across most of the world's freshwater and many salt-line environments. Fish are spawning, actively feeding, and concentrated in predictable locations. Salmon runs, which occur in late summer and early autumn across the Pacific and Atlantic northern watersheds, represent one of the most dramatic concentrated food resources available in temperate environments. A massive pulse of high-fat, high-protein food arriving predictably at the same locations year after year. Archaeological sites near ancient salmon rivers show dense occupation deposits, large quantities of fish bones, and evidence of processing in quantities far exceeding immediate consumption, suggesting that ancient humans at these locations were catching, processing, and preserving far more fish than the immediate group could eat, banking surplus for the leaner months. The technology ancient humans applied to summer fishing was considerably more sophisticated than the popular image of someone standing in a stream with a stick. Woven fish traps, constructed from plant fibers, wicker, and other flexible materials, have been found preserved at waterlogged archaeological sites in Europe, dating back thousands of years. Woven nets for fishing appear in the archaeological record across multiple continents. Fish weirs, semi-permanent structures built to channel fish into concentrated areas, have been identified at numerous ancient and historical sites and represent substantial collective labor investments suggesting organized, group-level fishing strategies rather than individual opportunistic efforts. Fish weirs are particularly interesting because they represent exactly the kind of capital investment, spending labor now to improve future resource acquisition, that was once considered beyond the cognitive and social capacity of prehistoric humans. The evidence says otherwise. Building a fish weir in a river requires understanding of water flow, fish behavior, material properties, and structural engineering principles sufficient to produce a functional installation. It requires coordinated group labor over multiple days. It represents planning horizons extending past the immediate moment. Ancient humans building weirs in anticipation of salmon runs were thinking weeks ahead and working collectively toward a deferred return. Behaviors that challenge simplistic assumptions about prehistoric cognitive and social organization. Plant food processing during summer was women's work in most documented hunter-gatherer societies. Though women's work, in this context, means something categorically different from its dismissive modern connotation. It means the primary caloric foundation of the group's diet, because in most documented foraging societies, plant foods gathered primarily by women contribute more total calories than the meat acquired in hunting, even when hunting success is high. The summer plant food calendar was managed with knowledge accumulated across generations and transmitted through intensive practical teaching. Which plants were ready in which microhabitats, at which elevations, after which temperature sequences, in which years of variable rainfall. This was not casual information casually acquired. It was a detailed ecological knowledge base representing the accumulated observations of many generations, maintained in cultural memory, and transmitted to the next generation through active apprenticeship beginning in childhood. Children in Paleolithic bands learned plant identification, not from books or structured lessons, but from walking with adults who named, examined, tasted, and evaluated plants continuously as part of the foraging process. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. A child who accompanied foraging adults from the age of 4 or 5 would have had years of embodied botanical experience by early adolescence, the kind of experiential knowledge that produces reliable plant identification and evaluation under field conditions, which is a substantially different cognitive product from academic botanical knowledge. Berries deserve specific attention because they appear so prominently in the archaeological record of summer subsistence. Blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, elderberries, gooseberries. Across the temperate northern hemisphere, various berry species produce their harvests in compressed seasonal windows during summer and early autumn. The work of berry harvesting at subsistence scale is not the casual afternoon activity it is for modern people picking a decorative pint at a farmer's market. Harvesting enough berries to matter nutritionally and to preserve a meaningful surplus means sustained daily picking work across the entire ripening window, covering large areas of productive habitat systematically. The preservation of summer berry surplus was a technology in its own right. Drying, spreading berries on flat surfaces in direct sunlight reduces water content dramatically, concentrating sugars and inhibiting microbial spoilage. Dried berries reduce in volume and weight, making them transportable and storable through the non-productive months. The nutritional content of dried berries, particularly the sugar calories, and, depending on species, vitamin content, made them a significant winter diet component for populations that took summer preservation seriously. Cooking berries into concentrated reductions and storing them in animal fat-sealed containers represented another preservation approach in groups with access to sufficient fat for sealing. Summer was also, critically, the primary season for social expansion, the time when dispersed winter groups came together in larger aggregations made possible by the abundance of the season. The fission-fusion model of ancient human social organization describes a pattern common in ethnographically documented hunter-gatherer societies. Smaller family or extended family groups splitting and dispersing during winter months when resources are scarce, and concentrated foraging would rapidly deplete any local area, then coming together in larger gatherings during summer when food abundance can support higher local population densities. These summer aggregations weren't merely convenient, they were socially essential. Marriage negotiations happened in summer gatherings, in populations where appropriate marriage partners couldn't be found within a small winter band, which, given incest avoidance rules that excluded close relatives, was often a constraint. Summer aggregations provided the partner pool from which marriage arrangements could be made. The social and genetic importance of this function can't be overstated. Small, isolated populations practicing endogamous marriage suffer progressive genetic depression and social dysfunction. Summer gatherings maintained the broader social network that kept populations genetically viable and socially coherent. Information exchange at summer gatherings was the internet of the Paleolithic. Knowledge about distant territories, the location of good stone sources, the movement patterns of game herds across regions too large for any single group to monitor, the condition of water sources and plant resources in areas other groups had traveled, was shared, compared, and integrated at these gatherings in ways that expanded every group's effective knowledge base. A group returning from a summer gathering with updated information about conditions 200 kilometers to the east was better prepared to navigate the coming year than a group with only its own local observations. Trade and material exchange were summer activities visible in the archaeological record through the presence of materials far from their geographic origin. Shells from coastlines appear at inland sites. Stone types from distant quarry locations appear at sites far from the source. Ochre, a pigment mineral used for body decoration, hide preservation, and symbolic marking, traveled enormous distances in the Paleolithic, implying exchange networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. Summer gatherings were the most likely mechanism for this long-distance exchange, with materials moving through chains of human contact at these aggregation events rather than through dedicated long-distance trade expeditions. Tool maintenance and manufacture during summer had a different character than during winter, both because summer provided certain raw materials that winter didn't, and because the pace and character of summer activity created specific tool needs. Flint knapping, the production of stone tools through controlled fracture of appropriate stone, was practiced year-round, but took on particular significance in summer when groups traveled to areas containing good knapping stone and could replenish supplies depleted through winter use. The summer movements of groups toward productive stone sources represent a form of seasonal resource management applied to industrial materials rather than food. Knapping stone isn't renewable on human timescales, but its geographic distribution is predictable, and planning summer travel routes to include known stone sources was a routine element of the seasonal logistical calendar. Wooden tools and implements, spear shafts, digging sticks, basket frames, structural elements for shelters were produced from green wood most easily worked in summer when a sappy content kept wood flexible and workable. Seasoning wood, allowing cut timber to dry slowly to prevent cracking, was a process ancient humans managed by cutting timber at appropriate seasons and allowing controlled drying. The production of high-quality wooden implements required understanding wood properties that only comes from extensive experience with specific species under specific conditions. Bone and antler tool production reached a seasonal peak because summer provided fresh antler, shed by deer species annually. With properties different from old antler or bone recovered from long-dead animals. Fresh shed antler, worked while still containing some moisture, produces tool blanks with specific fracture and workability properties that experienced craftspeople valued. Paleolithic sites across Europe and Asia contain quantities of worked antler, suggesting that antler recovery during summer shedding season was a deliberate activity, not a casual one. The social and cultural dimensions of summer ancient human life include activities that tend to get less archaeological visibility, but are well attested through ethnographic analogy and reasonable inference. Body decoration intensified during summer gatherings. Ochre application to skin. Documented in ancient populations across Africa and Europe from the presence of ochre at sites and wear patterns on ochre pieces consistent with application, was almost certainly more elaborate during the larger social gatherings of summer, when the social functions of decoration, identity marking, and signaling were most actively in play. Modern hunter-gatherer populations consistently elaborate body decoration and ornamentation for social gatherings, and there is no reason to expect ancient populations were different. Music and communal performance are near impossibles to recover archaeologically, but were almost certainly present. The oldest confirmed musical instruments, bone flutes, including a vulture bone flute from a site in Germany, dating back roughly 40,000 years, established that music was part of human culture well into the Paleolithic. Flutes and percussion instruments don't preserve well in most archaeological conditions, which means absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Ethnographically, communal music, dance, and storytelling are consistently present at summer gatherings in foraging societies, functioning in social bonding, ceremonial, and information transmission roles simultaneously. Storytelling as a summer activity is worth dwelling on because it represents one of the oldest and most distinctly human technologies for transmitting knowledge and maintaining cultural cohesion. Long summer evenings, particularly at high latitudes where midsummer twilight extends for hours, created the time and the social context for extended narrative performance. Stories encoding ecological knowledge, social norms, group history, and cosmological frameworks were the primary medium through which ancient humans transmitted accumulated cultural knowledge across generations without writing. The investment ancient humans made in narrative, the time, the social attention, the elaboration of story as an art form, was an investment in the continuity of everything they knew. Summer hunting strategies deserve their own focused examination, because they differed meaningfully from the desperate winter hunts that popular imagination tends to default to. Late summer, as animals put on fat in preparation for winter, was the optimal hunting window for acquiring high-calorie prey. An animal hunted in late summer is carrying more stored fat than the same animal hunted in late winter. Fat that represents the highest calorie component of the carcass and was valued accordingly by ancient humans for whom dietary fat was a precious resource rather than a macronutrient to avoid. Communal drives, coordinating large numbers of people to move animals toward terrain traps, cliffs, or ambush positions, were summer and early autumn activities made possible by the larger group sizes of the summer aggregation period. The famous bison jumps of the North American Great Plains, where entire herds were driven over cliff edges by coordinated groups of hunters, required numbers of people substantially larger than a typical winter band. They were quintessentially summer and early autumn activities, executed when the social aggregations of the season made large-scale coordination possible. Mass kill events, even when they produced far more meat than could be immediately consumed, were worth executing because of the preservation possibilities the late summer context provided. Cool nights combined with warm days could support meat drying. The abundant plant materials of summer provided fuel for smoking preservation. Fat rendered from the abundant late summer carcasses could be stored in containers sealed against air. A successful mass hunt in late summer could produce preserved surplus that materially improved a group's survival odds through the following winter. The physicality of ancient summer life produced bodies calibrated to those demands in ways modern humans almost never replicate. Walking 15 kilometers was a routine day, not an athletic achievement. Carrying heavy loads of gathered plant foods, water, or butchered animal products over varied terrain was routine physical labor for men and women alike from the age when children could be productive participants. Climbing, swimming, lifting, sustained walking. The summer body of an ancient human was a product of months of accumulated physical demand that produced fitness levels modern people associate with dedicated athletic training rather than everyday existence. Heat acclimatization, the physiological adaptation to sustained exposure to elevated temperatures, was something ancient humans in warm summer environments developed progressively as temperatures rose through spring and into summer. The body's capacity to acclimatize to heat is substantial. Increased plasma volume, reduced cardiovascular strain at a given temperature, more efficient, sweating, earlier onset of sweating at lower core temperatures. Ancient humans who moved seasonally into summer heat conditions were not passive sufferers of those conditions. Their bodies were actively adapting to optimize function in the thermal environment they were operating in. What ancient summer tells us ultimately is that the seasonal rhythm of the year wasn't a backdrop to ancient human life. It was the architecture of it. Summer wasn't a break from the serious business of survival. It was the season of maximum strategic investment, the window during which the calories were banked, the relationships maintained, the knowledge transmitted, the tools produced, and the social bonds reinforced that would carry the group through the difficult months ahead. The urgency of summer in a world without food preservation technology beyond the most basic, without agriculture's promise of reliable annual harvest, without refrigeration's extension of perishable food's useful life, was a real and organizing pressure. The abundance was real, but so was its temporality. Every day of peak berry harvest that passed unharvested was food the winter version of yourself wasn't going to eat. Every day of ideal fishing conditions that passed unexploited was protein the spring version of your children wasn't going to have. Summer created urgency through its own abundance. The abundance that made surplus possible also made its brief window pressure-inducing. Ancient humans sitting around a summer fire in a large gathering, having walked considerable distances that day through productive terrain, surrounded by the smells of drying meat and preserved fish and bundled plant foods, with the long twilight of a northern summer still illuminating the sky, those humans weren't less alive than their modern descendants. They were more physically embedded in the world around them, more calibrated to its rhythms, more aware of what the angle of the sun and the ripeness of the berries and the movement of the herds actually meant for the days ahead. Summer was the season when everything that could go right went right, and ancient humans treated it accordingly, not as rest, not as vacation, as the most important work of the year, which, if you think about it while sitting in your air-conditioned room with a refrigerator full of food someone else grew and processed and shipped to within walking distance of where you sleep, is a perspective worth sitting with for a moment.